There was a role, a single role, that shattered everything. A film that should have been his crowning achievement, the final masterpiece in an already legendary career. Instead, it became a nightmare he could never escape. Gene Hackman never spoke about it. He never told the world what happened on that set. But something broke him so deeply, so irreversibly, that he vanished from Hollywood without a word. No farewell tour, no sentimental interviews, no looking back. What happened during those months of filming that made Hackman turn his back on the industry forever? Hollywood is a machine built on contradictions. It creates icons, then discards them when they're no longer useful. It worships talent, yet often chooses profit over art. It gave Hackman everything, and then took it all away. He had conquered this world. From The French Connection to Unforgiven, Hackman wasn't just a great actor. He was one of the greatest. And then, in 2004, after Welcome to Mooseport, he was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no official explanation, just silence. Theories swirled. Health concerns? He was in his 70s. Maybe he simply didn't have the stamina anymore. Disgust with Hollywood? The industry had changed, and many of his peers had complained about the shift. Personal choice? Hackman had always been a private man, uninterested in the spotlight beyond his films. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. Hackman was done. No one believed he would return. Until he did. It began with a phone call. A director, one of the few Hackman had always admired but never worked with, had a script. Not just any script. Not a cash grab. Not a franchise sequel. Not a soulless blockbuster. This was different. A character unlike any Hackman had ever played. A role that demanded total transformation, both physically and psychologically. A man haunted by his past, shaped by choices he could never take back. It wasn't just a script. It was an opportunity to return one last time, to leave behind a final masterpiece, to close the book on his own terms. Hackman didn't say yes immediately. He read and reread the script. He analyzed every word, every nuance, every hidden meaning. This wasn't just a role, it was a statement. And after weeks of silence, he called the director back. "If I do this, it has to be worth it." Not a request, a warning. Because Hackman was a perfectionist. Even after 20 years away, he wasn't going to show up and phone it in. If he came back, he would give everything he had left. Hackman trained for months. He adjusted his diet, reshaped his body. He researched obsessively, meeting people with real-life stories that mirrored his character. He practiced alone, staring into the mirror, studying every movement, every breath, every shift in emotion. And when he finally stepped onto set, Hollywood held its breath. The crew knew they were witnessing something special. No one joked around. No one wasted time. Everyone treated this film like it would be Hackman's masterpiece. For the first few weeks, everything felt right. Hackman was electrifying. Every scene, every take, every moment. Flawless. People started whispering, "This could be his Oscar. This could be a career-defining role. One of the greatest performances of all time." It should have been the perfect comeback. But then, something shifted. Something Hackman didn't expect. Something he had forgotten about Hollywood during his years away. And once he saw it, really saw it, there was no going back. At first, it was subtle. A few strange decisions by the studio. A few compromises that didn't sit right. A few moments on set that made Hackman uneasy. But then, the illusion shattered. Hackman realized what Hollywood had become, and how different it was from the world he had left behind. This wasn't the industry he had once ruled. This was something else. Directors had no real power. Every creative decision was overridden by executives who cared only about numbers. Actors weren't artists anymore. They were brand ambassadors, chosen for their social media following rather than their talent. Movies weren't about storytelling. They were about algorithms, test screenings, global markets, and corporate-approved narratives. Heckman had spent decades perfecting his craft, believing in the art of filmmaking. Now, he was surrounded by people who didn't care about any of it, and he couldn't stand it. Everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, was gone. Hollywood wasn't broken. It had evolved into something he no longer recognized, something he wanted no part of. And then, one day, without warning, Heckman walked off set. He didn't yell, he didn't argue, he didn't explain. He just left. For the second time in his life, he disappeared. But this time, it was different. This wasn't retirement. This was rejection. A final, silent statement. I don't belong here anymore. The film was never finished. The studio buried it. No official statements. No explanations. It was as if it never existed. Heckman never spoke about it, never revealed what exactly went wrong. But those who were there, the crew members, the actors, the people who witnessed it firsthand, knew the truth. This was not just another failed film. This was the moment Gene Hackman's love for Hollywood died. And with it, any chance of him ever returning. Because for Heckman, this wasn't just about one bad experience. This was confirmation. Hollywood had changed, and some things, once lost, can never be found again. Gene Heckman had always viewed cinema as a form of artistic expression, a medium that demanded depth, transformation, and authenticity. For decades, he had chosen roles that challenged him, that pushed him beyond mere performance. He wasn't just an actor, he was a storyteller. But when he returned to Hollywood after nearly 20 years, he quickly realized the industry had become something unrecognizable. From the moment he stepped onto the set, there was an unsettling feeling in the air. Not fear, not excitement, just a quiet, creeping sense that the people in control were no longer those who truly understood or cared about film as an art form. And then, as weeks turned into months, Heckman came to a painful realization. He had walked into a world that no longer wanted actors. It wanted brands. It wanted marketable faces, malleable personalities, stars who would say what they were told, act how they were instructed, and sell whatever product the studio had lined up behind the scenes. They don't want artists anymore. They want content creators. At first, he believed in the project. The script was powerful, the character layered, the story deeply human. He saw in it the perfect farewell, a role that could stand as the final defining mark of his career. But soon, the calls started coming. Some elements need to be tweaked for broader appeal. The character should be more relatable to younger demographics. We're thinking of simplifying certain scenes to make them more digestible. Heckman tried to be patient. He knew times had changed. He had watched Hollywood shift from an industry of auteurs to one dominated by box office projections. But he still hoped, perhaps foolishly, that at its core, storytelling still mattered. It didn't. The script was rewritten weekly. Moments of depth were stripped away, replaced with lines that tested better in marketing surveys. Scenes that once carried weight were softened, edited, sanitized into something safe and unchallenging. The film, which had once promised to be bold, was becoming something entirely different, something formulaic, predictable. And the worst part? Heckman had no control over his own performance. He had worked with visionaries, William Friedkin, Francis Ford Coppola, Clint Eastwood. Directors who fought for every frame, who refused to compromise their art for the sake of commerce. But this time, Heckman saw the truth. The director was powerless. The real decisions were being made by people who didn't care about cinema, only about profitability. Producers dictated the narrative. Executives decided how a character should be played. Marketers determined what parts of the film were unnecessary. It wasn't just a betrayal of art. It was a betrayal of everything Heckman believed in. They told him how to deliver lines, how to move, how to react. They watered down his character, trimming away the edges, sanding down the roughness until he was no longer playing a person, just a concept, designed to please as many demographics as possible. When Heckman resisted, they made their stance clear. This isn't about you. This is about the audience. But Heckman knew better. This wasn't about the audience. It was about control. It was about turning cinema into a perfectly calibrated product, one that could be pre-sold, mass-produced, and monetized down to the last detail. He tried to fight back. He met with the director, arguing for the integrity of the film. He pushed back against unnecessary rewrites, fought for scenes that mattered. But he was fighting a system built to erase people like him. A system where contracts were signed before scripts were written. A system where marketing dictated storytelling. A system where actors weren't performers anymore. They were assets. And no matter how much he fought, Heckman was powerless against the machine. Every morning, he walked onto set feeling hollow. He delivered lines he didn't believe in, acted out moments that had been stripped of their meaning. He was no longer an actor, just another piece in a corporate puzzle. A name to slap on a poster to boost ticket sales. By the time the final scene was shot, Heckman knew the truth. This was his last film. Hollywood wasn't a place for actors anymore. Hollywood wasn't a place for filmmakers anymore. Hollywood wasn't a place for stories anymore. It was a factory, a perfectly oiled, soulless machine. And for Gene Heckman, that was a reality he could never accept. So he left. And this time, he made sure he would never come back. Gene Heckman had never been one to back down from a fight. He had spent his career pushing back against directors who tried to water down his characters, against producers who wanted him to play it safe. He had fought for roles that mattered, for scripts that carried weight. But this time, it wasn't just another battle. This time, it was the end of the war. For months, he had swallowed his frustration. He had watched helplessly as the script he once believed in was rewritten into something unrecognizable. He had gritted his teeth through every unnecessary change, every hollow demand from executives who cared only about the bottom line. But on one particular day, everything came crashing down. It was supposed to be the most important scene of the film, a moment of raw emotion, a turning point that would define the entire story. Heckman had spent weeks preparing. He had analyzed every word, every pause, every flicker of emotion his character needed to convey. He was ready to pour himself into this performance. And then, the director approached him. "We need to make some adjustments," the director said carefully. "The producers think the scene is too heavy. They want something more accessible." Heckman stared at him, unblinking. "Accessible," he repeated. "They just feel it's a little too complex. They want something simpler." Simpler. Heckman clenched his jaw. He knew exactly what that meant. They didn't want depth. They didn't want nuance. They wanted something easy, something digestible, something that would play well with test audiences and maximize international box office numbers. He had spent his life fighting against roles that reduced acting to mere puppetry, and now they were asking him to become one. No more quiet intensity. No more layered performances. No more truth. They wanted an actor who would follow orders, not one who actually cared about his craft. Hackman's grip on the script tightened. He could feel the anger simmering beneath his skin, the weight of months of frustration pressing down on him. But when he spoke, his voice was cold, measured. "I didn't come back to Hollywood for this," he said. Silence. The director, shifting uncomfortably, tried again. "Look, Gene, I get it. But this is just how things work now. We have to make the film marketable." Hackman laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marketable?" he echoed. "You think I spent my entire career for this? To turn art into a product?" The tension on set was suffocating. Crew members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they weren't hearing any of this. The director sighed. "It's not about selling out. It's about making sure the film reaches as many people as possible." But Hackman knew that was a lie. This wasn't about reaching people. This was about control, about stripping away anything that might challenge an audience, anything that might make them think too hard, feel too deeply. And Hackman wasn't going to be a part of it. The argument escalated. Voices were raised. Hackman accused them of gutting the film for the sake of profit. The director insisted that this was the reality of modern filmmaking. The producers, watching from a distance, didn't intervene. They didn't have to. They had already won. And that was the moment Hackman made his decision. Without another word, he let the script slip from his fingers. The pages fluttered to the ground, discarded. He turned, walked away from the set. And just before he stepped out for good, he stopped. He turned back, meeting the director's gaze one last time. Then, in a voice steady but filled with finality, he said, "This isn't acting. This is garbage." No one spoke. No one stopped him. Because deep down, they all knew he was right. The news spread like wildfire. Hackman had walked out. He had abandoned the film. Producers scrambled to do damage control, spinning the narrative as creative differences. A replacement was quickly found, an actor willing to follow orders, willing to play the part the way they wanted. The film was finished. It was released. It made money. But it was empty. There was no heart, no fire, no soul in it. Just another mass-produced, algorithm-tested piece of content. And Gene Hackman? He never returned. He ignored every call, every offer, no matter how many millions were thrown at him. He chose silence over compromise, dignity over dollars. Because Hollywood was no longer the place he had once loved, and he refused to be just another puppet on its stage. That day, Gene Hackman walked off the set, not just as an actor, but as a symbol of defiance. And for that, Hollywood never forgave him. He had challenged the machine, spoken out against the system that controlled careers, built legends, and destroyed them just as easily. He had defied the invisible hands that dictated who would rise and who would be forgotten. And Hollywood does not forget. Once, they had called him one of the greatest actors of all time. His name had been spoken with reverence. But now, they erased him. His presence in the film was wiped clean. His name vanished from the credits. His face disappeared from every trailer, every poster, every ad. The marketing campaign was rewritten as if he had never been there. When the cast and crew did interviews, they spoke carefully, deliberately, avoiding any mention of Hackman. To the unsuspecting public, he had never set foot on that set. It wasn't just omission, it was deliberate erasure. But Hollywood wasn't satisfied with simply removing him. They needed to control the story. They needed to make sure no one questioned why Gene Hackman had left. Because if people asked that question, they might start asking others. What had really happened on that set? What had Hackman seen that made him walk away? Had Hollywood finally rotted from the inside? That was a risk they couldn't take. So, the whispers began. Heckman was too difficult to work with. He clashed with the director. He wasn't the actor he used to be. No proof, no direct accusations, just quiet, insidious rumors planted in the right places, spread by the right voices. And no one defended him. Heckman had spent decades in this industry. He had worked with some of the biggest names, formed friendships with fellow actors, directors, producers, people who had once praised him, sworn loyalty to him. Now, silence. Not because they didn't know the truth, but because they knew the cost of speaking it. One wrong word in his defense, and they would be next. So they chose self-preservation. Heckman was left alone. And then, the moment came when he truly understood just how far Hollywood would go to erase him. One evening, sitting in his home, he turned on the television. An interview with the film's director was playing. They were discussing the film's most powerful scene, the one Heckman had fought for, the one he had poured himself into before walking away. The scene had made it into the final cut. But when the director spoke about it, he didn't mention Heckman's name. Not once. He credited the production team. He praised the other actors. He talked about the vision behind the moment. But Gene Heckman did not exist. Heckman let out a quiet, bitter laugh. This wasn't just about this one film. Hollywood wasn't just trying to remove him from a project. They were trying to erase him from history. Once, he had been a legend, a name spoken with admiration, written in the annals of cinema. But legends are only useful to Hollywood as long as they play by the rules. And Heckman had broken them. The film was released. It made hundreds of millions. It was praised, celebrated. But no one remembered that Gene Heckman had ever been part of it, because Hollywood had decided it didn't need him anymore. And so, they erased him. Gene Heckman never accepted roles on a whim. Every character he brought to life was carefully chosen, a piece of the cinematic legacy he wanted to leave behind. And this should have been his grand finale. But Hollywood stole it from him. From the moment he first flipped through the script, he felt something stir inside him, a rare excitement, a reminder of why he had fallen in love with acting in the first place. This wasn't just another blockbuster churned out to rake in money. It was a story with weight, peeling back the layers of human nature, exposing the cracks in society, forcing its audience to confront uncomfortable truths. His character wasn't a clean-cut hero, but a man deeply scarred, wrestling with guilt, burdened by past mistakes. A role demanding nuance, depth, and raw vulnerability. Heckman saw something real in it. This was the one. The film that could cement his name in history. The performance that would be remembered long after he was gone. So he said yes, and that, he would later realize, was his greatest mistake. The moment filming began, Heckman felt a chill of unease. Hollywood wasn't interested in making art. It was interested in making a product. A profitable, marketable, easily digestible product. The script he had admired was deemed too complicated. The themes too heavy. The emotions too challenging. So they started stripping it down. Scenes of quiet introspection, gone. Moments of moral ambiguity, rewritten into simple good versus evil conflicts. His character's internal torment, replaced with generic action sequences. Heckman watched helplessly as the film unraveled before his eyes. They weren't making a masterpiece, they were making something that could sell. His character, once so rich and layered, was whittled down to a shadow of himself. The moments that made him human His regrets, his vulnerabilities, his silent battles were tossed aside. The script was watered down to the point where Heckman barely recognized the role he had spent months preparing for. But the final betrayal came in the edit room. There was a scene, a single, powerful moment that had cemented his decision to take this role in the first place. A quiet reckoning. No grand speeches. No soaring soundtrack. Just a look. A breath. A silence heavy with the weight of a lifetime of regret. Heckman had poured everything into that scene. He had lived in it. And when the cameras stopped rolling, the set had been engulfed in absolute stillness. No one had spoken, because they all knew. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. But when the final cut of the film was screened, that scene was gone. Erased. Heckman confronted the director. Why? A weary sigh. A helpless shrug. The studio thought it was too slow. Too emotional. They wanted something punchier. And in that moment, Heckman understood. Hollywood hadn't just destroyed the film, it had betrayed him. When the movie premiered, he sat in the darkened theater, watching something that no longer bore any resemblance to what he had signed up for. The depth was gone. The soul was gone. The film was nothing more than a hollow, commercialized shell of what it could have been. And the worst part? The audience would never know. They would never know that Gene Heckman had given everything to a performance that no longer existed. They would never know that his final role had been stolen from him. Heckman had believed, naively, foolishly, that cinema was still about art. That belief died that night, and with it, any desire he had to ever step in front of a camera again. Gene Heckman had spent a lifetime fighting for his craft, choosing roles that mattered, refusing to settle for mediocrity, preserving the dignity of a true actor. But in the end, Hollywood taught him one final bitter truth. And this time, he walked away for good. When the film was released, Heckman was nowhere to be found. No red carpets, no interviews, no promotional tours. When asked why, his answer was simple. It's not my movie anymore. To audiences, it was just another film. To Heckman, it was a painful betrayal. That was the moment he knew. He no longer belonged in Hollywood. Even after the fallout, studios still came knocking. New scripts arrived. Big roles were offered. Some even promised him complete creative control. But Heckman wasn't interested. He had read enough scripts to know how this story always ended. No matter how good a film started, Hollywood would find a way to cheapen it, to make it safer, simpler, more profitable. He had fought that battle long enough, and he was too tired to keep fighting. So he turned everything down. Award shows? He ignored them. Invitations from old colleagues? Unanswered. Hollywood, to him, was already dead. One day, a reporter spotted Heckman in a quiet little cafe. Older, yes, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Will you ever return to the screen?" they asked. Heckman didn't hesitate. Never. No bitterness, no second-guessing, just the truth. The reporter pressed on. "Do you still watch Hollywood films?" Heckman gave a small, knowing smile. "I don't think they make movies for me anymore." Not the words of a man angry at the industry. The words of a man who had simply walked away. Hollywood carried on without him. The blockbusters, the awards, the endless cycle of new stars and forgotten legends. But none of it mattered anymore. His name still came up in interviews. His peers still called him a legend. His performances were still studied, admired, honored. But Heckman wasn't there to hear it. He didn't need Hollywood's recognition anymore. because he had seen behind the curtain, and he left before it could destroy his legacy. His final role should have been a masterpiece. Instead, it became proof that he could never trust this industry again. People used to hope that one day he might come back, that maybe, just maybe, the right film could change his mind. But Heckman knew better. He had seen what Hollywood truly was, and he made sure the door closed behind him. He got out, but the scars remained. And the worst part? He wasn't the only one. If they could do this to a legend like Gene Hackman, what hope did anyone else have? Gene Hackman walked away, but Hollywood's mark on him never faded. He gave up everything, his career, his passion, his place in the industry, just to break free from a system that had once meant everything to him. If this could happen to someone like Heckman, a legend with decades of success, what does that say about the countless others? Heckman left, but not everyone has that choice.